Um, I just thought it's worthwhile giving a small amount of context as to what started me on the BIM journey. So we come from the FM end of the world, so we're on the end of that scale. And a couple of years ago, we took receipt of a new building that we were managing on behalf of Myer. They built a new head office just down the road in Docklands. And when the handover arrived, it was the standard 50 boxes of information and documentation. So we phoned the guys up and said, thanks very much, nice of you to deliver this, but can we have all of that electronically? And we know you modelled it in 3D, so if we could get hold of that, that would be really useful for us to integrate into all of our operational systems. So they went, no, we don't have one of those. We've only got the O&M manuals. We've only got them printed. I said, no, you must have some electronic stuff. Really, there must be something. And so they sent us the PDFs of all of the floor plans. It was really that experience that started our swim back upstream to find out what it was that was the issue. And today I just want to talk about three of the things that we've come across as part of that journey. So some of the challenges that we've seen in terms of delivering FM models, being the recipient of those, the we do BIM kind of theory. I want to look at some of the benefits of intelligent building information management by never underestimating the value of timely and accurate information. And we've already heard a couple of times it said that this is about the information. And then I want to quickly look at Federation Square, which is a pilot project we did because a fool learns by his own mistakes and a wise man by those of others. And if anybody knows me, you know I'm a fool. So I'm happy to take on these pilot kind of projects. Everybody that we've been involved in at some stage in the process has said we do BIM. And then when we go, well, actually, maybe you don't, then everybody questions it. It's probably worth saying that when I talk about BIM, and I know that there's a gazillion different definitions, and we've heard lots of those today, I'm talking about this end, the building information management component, because that's where we as the operators get the most value out of the information. And what we discovered in talking to lots of different people and talking to organisations, and in fact it's reinforced even here today, is that the issues are actually endemic. We didn't just deal with a bodgy guy who didn't know what he was doing. It's actually the way the industry works. And that the models that we're producing are largely unusable for the FM phase of the life cycle. Now, I understand that better now because we design the models to give the deliverables that we're contractually obliged to do. And then we hand those over to the next guy if he's lucky, and he does them for the next level. And by the time you get to the operations side of it, you really never see anything. And for those organisations who are actually out there at the kind of leading edge, they've all had to define their own internal standards. And so that causes challenges when we get to the other end. So the work that's happening to get those standards to be aligned makes a huge difference for how easy it is for us to leverage that information by the time it gets to us. This is an actual model that was delivered for a client, cost them $2.5 million. It's obviously been pixelated out for protection of the innocent. What we discovered was that the navigation wasn't purposeful. There was no or inconsistent object data, systems weren't defined. And as I said, not because they'd built a bad model, simply because it hadn't been designed for the purpose of delivering it to the FM level of detail, if you like. And even where they did have data in the item, it was actually inconsistent. They had quite good internal standards, but they were actually different between every discipline. So information that was in one place was here in one, it was somewhere else in the other. So from our point of view, if we try and automate that, it makes it very difficult. And it means that we've got to then put in a whole lot of resources from a business analysis point of view and go back through the model to understand how it actually has been constructed, what sort of standards it's used. Likewise, if things aren't categorised in a way that we can use, we have a system that we use that allows people to phone in with their FM queries. So someone like a Myer or a Woolies has thousands of calls a day. One of the issues that they have is that often they're trying to dispatch tradies, but they don't give them the information that they need. So we built a knowledge base of what are the questions you need to ask based on the type of issue that you've got. How do you lead people through that process? If the information's categorised, then that can be automatically populated. If it's not, we've got to sit down and manually create that from the beginning of the process. So it makes a huge difference to our usability and our leverage of the model depending on how it's put together. Odd things that don't matter, so much during the design phase that crop in is things like an external door identified as a bathroom door, which is probably slightly better than the other way around. It's a little less embarrassing than putting a glass door in the bathroom, but it nonetheless creates issues. It means that we don't have correct asset listings. It means that we've got inaccurate warranty information and we get the incorrect information for replacement parts. This was one that I didn't even realise was an issue. This is the two fire extinguishers, the one from the architectural model and the one from the fire services model. And I genuinely believed they were two fire extinguishers. I just thought they were different types because they look different. Turns out they're not. Turns out that our practice had forgotten, in this particular case, to turn off the architectural version in the model. So you go, well, it's not really a big deal. How does that impact? Well, it actually does, because in this particular scenario, a client believes that they've got, let's say, 400 of them. There's only 200. They go out and they put out a tender for 400. They get a response back for 400, priced on 400. That's all set. Then the first time they send the guy out to do the field inspection, he goes out and he services all of them. He's not told to go out and do 400, he's told to go out and service all the fire extinguishers. He comes back, he goes, I've serviced all the fire extinguishers. The count isn't done, and clients end up paying for twice the amount of maintenance that they actually need. Connected systems, we were talking about that before. I saw in one of the videos the ability to be able to isolate quickly where something's going on. And that's a real world thing that we have quite often, especially in emergency response situations, where you're trying to find out where the shut-off valve is. We can only do that if the systems are actually connected. And what I found is that language is different. So the language you guys use from a system point of view and the way it's used in the Revit world is a different terminology than what we need to be able to identify it from one end to the other. And so that causes us challenges. Conversely, we have the other issue where all of the systems are not distinguished, where they're actually one. So you pick a particular system and you get everything. That's not particularly useful for us to be able to isolate down when we've actually got the thing being deployed. Another one that we found was a challenge with this particular model was that the spaces weren't bounded. Not a common issue, but it was an issue with this. So if we're trying to dispatch somebody to a particular location, all that we can tell them is somewhere in the two buildings we just built is where it is. It's much more useful to us if we can actually get them to a level and a location specific. So they seem simple things, and yet they're overlooked because we weren't designing purposefully. We weren't designing with the end purpose in mind. So what difference does that make? How is all of that information of benefit? And if you've been to these kind of things before, you will have heard lots of words about how we can use them and how the benefit sits across all of those. You will have seen charts, I'm sure, that talk about where the expense is, that interoperability is 12% in design and 22% in construction and 66% of it's in operations. But I want to focus on some of the other benefits that you may not get exposed to because you probably don't get to talk to people who operate this stuff very often. And I would say never underestimate the value of timely and accurate information. It can make a huge difference, and if I just go through a few of these. So this is an example of a contract review and negotiation. What happens in that process is that most owners don't actually know what they've got. So they put out a tender, and the guy who's responding to the tender doesn't understand what it is, so he builds in a hell of a lot of risk factor. If we've got the right information and we've got the right kind of performance history about it, we can actually go and give them clarity over what it is that we're really asking them to do. And in this particular case, in the MEP environment, we were able to take 50% out of the contract. It's not because they screwed anybody, it's just because they actually knew what it was that they had and they knew how it was performing. Confidence reduces spin. So if I'm going to pick up the phone and I don't know when the guy's going to arrive, I'm going to pick up the phone every day until he gets there. That causes a lot of spin. We've been able to do things like take 70% of the volume out of calls just by getting a system that manages the information from one end to the other, so that you have some confidence that the guy's going to turn up when he said he was going to turn up to do the work, and that's visible to everybody throughout that process. So that reduces substantially for owners. The certainty reduces waste. So if I don't know what I'm going to get in terms of when I put my call in to get something fixed, then I just mark it as urgent. So suddenly everything's urgent because I want the guy to get there as quick as he can because I don't know when he's really going to get there. But if I know that he's actually going to turn up, then I can take 33% out of my cost of responding to emergency, urgent requests. If I have predictability, if I can actually understand what's been going on before and map that against the information that you guys have included about what's to be expected, then I can actually work on my proactiveness to reduce reactiveness. I can drive my work orders down. And again, we've been able over time to cut out a third of the work orders because you're able to put in more intelligent, better built, scheduled maintenance. This is an example where insight identifies issues. So in this particular case, we can see in the chart up there that there's a bit of a blip. So we go, that's unusual. There was nothing, then there's a blip, then there's nothing. We drill down on it, we see that these are 1As, which is urgent, fix it in 30 minutes. There's two things that cause that. One is we've got a plumbing leak and we had one of those. The other one is we've got someone trapped in a lift. That's not a good thing. And this is where you've got to be careful what you ask people for, because they will often give it to you. So there was a new guy working for this particular organisation. He was told to go and let the people out of the lift. So he went and let the people out of the lift. Then he was called back a little bit later to go and let the next lot of people out of the lift. So he let that lot of people out of the lift. Then he was called back a little while later to let the next lot of people out of the lift. So he let them out of the lift. So we went, can you please ask him to go and run a diagnostic on the lift and fix whatever's wrong with it? And they went, yeah, that's a good idea. So in this particular case, it's a real example. In this particular case, it was just a breakdown in their process. The guy hadn't been inducted properly. Hadn't been an issue, suddenly it was an issue. We got that from having that access to the information. And it also improves performance if you can make things visible. If you can articulate what it is that you want and then measure people against it, you can get an improvement in performance over time. So you can see here the blue line in the middle is people bringing their performance up. We're able to look at what it was before. The back numbers are what is a reasonable benchmark across a sector of the industry. And in this case, we had one vendor that responded and we had another vendor that just couldn't make it. They were just too big and they were weighed down by their own internal machinations. The point is that we're having conversations with them that are actually about the issues. It's not a he said, she said kind of scenario. We're actually dealing with real information. And then as we talked about before, there's all of the non-tangible things in terms of the ease of handover, the maintenance, building things so that they're maintenance and safety friendly. It makes a huge difference to the experience for the next 30, 50, whatever years it is that the thing's going to be around. And it improves our responsiveness because, you know, we've often got people phoning whatever call centre it is or whichever FM guy it is to go, that's things leaking. If we've got the information in the system, we can quickly identify what it is, we can figure out where it is, and we can tell them where they've got to go to do that, and that takes seconds, not running around. I mean, one of the consulting engineering companies we worked with actually had a flood, their lift well flooded, and it took them 6 hours to figure out where the hell to go to turn off the water because they couldn't tell. It's cascading down lift wells in a 16-storey building. So if I take a moment now to say that there are lots of upsides, a lot of them you may not have thought about, you probably never had exposure to, but they're all the reasons that the conversations that you're having about how to build these things purposefully, the conversations we're having about level of detail to include and what that means, are important at the other end of the process. I'd like to just reflect a little bit on our experience at Fed Square. So, being a bit of a glutton for punishment, as I mentioned before, I'm a big believer in a practical approach, that there's no better way to learn than to roll up your sleeves and get stuck into it. So we said, this is not working, we want to figure out how to make this work, what are the traps? So we got a pilot project going. We wanted to retro BIM an existing facility because I couldn't wait for years for it to be built. And we wanted to integrate that into an FM. We wanted to take that model through a QA process so we had some sort of assurance that it was going to happen. And because of the site that we chose, which was Federation Square, we also wanted to look at solving a couple of their problems, one of which was their site is very complicated. You can't tell someone to go to level 3, room 6. You know, it's a very all over the place kind of site. And most importantly, we wanted to learn from the experience to figure out what worked and what didn't, from a collaboration point of view and from a technology point of view. And so, being, as I said, a bit of a masochist, we picked Revit and Navisworks, and we also picked Bentley and Navigator, because life isn't hard enough. We used a couple of FM systems called SmartSite and Ecodamus to go through the process with. We picked Federation Square because it's iconic, so it's something that people can relate to some degree. It's a very complicated site. And it's a diverse multi-tenancy environment. So it gave us the ability to, over time, explore lots of different types of use for spaces and how we might use this information. So not just for the standard stuff, but for evacuation planning and even just getting guys to the right location. Because they're innovators, the guys that work there, so they were easy to work with, it was low risk, and we had a good relationship with the guys from Tandem Design, who were the architects who were continuing to keep their plans updated, albeit that in 2D at the moment, prior to this. It is a very complicated site to work on, so we just picked a little bit. So we worked on the East Shard, which is on the west side of the square, which doesn't make any sense to me, but that's nonetheless where the East Shard is. I don't know, it's just the way it works. And so we looked at that and we had that modelled up. The architecture, as I said, was done in Bentley. The MEP services were done in Revit. And as you can see, there's a hell of a lot of it that's actually underground. So, you know, the whole thing's built in a kind of interesting and unusual way. It also has an interesting challenge because there is no such thing as a vertical anything. Everything's at an angle. So if you want to figure out how to break an IFC, yeah, just do everything at an angle. It really struggles with that process. So we learned a lot out of that. But we did manage to generate some outcomes. We managed the model through a project document QA system. So we were able to take the model and integrate it into a system that would allow us to be able to manage the documentation process. So if you like, the QA of the model and the handover component. Yeah, because we wanted to test that little bit of what it would be like. The system gives us the ability to be able to see a federated model and understand how that all hangs together. It's delivered over the web, which is cool from an FM point of view. We can get easy access to all of the attributes and understand what's in the document, what's in the model, I should say. We can see what's in the various types. We're also able to manage the documentation, and it'll give us a list to say, this is what you expected, here's the attributes that you said were important, they have or they haven't been delivered. So it helps us with the management process. Here's the documentation you're expecting, that has or hasn't been delivered. So we found that that process, while not 100% seamless, you could kind of make it happen if you put in a little bit of energy and effort. into the process. And it also gave us the ability to figure out which systems were and weren't connected within it, which again is an important part of the value to us at the other end of the process. Then we wanted to take it to the next step and integrate it with the FM ready model into an FM system to see how that might function and how we might be able to leverage that. So we integrated it into a work order management system that does all the work order management things that I was talking about before, so that we can give people who are the operators the ability to be able to quickly visualise what it is that people are talking about in a fairly friendly environment. These are not people who live and breathe by these things. They have the ability to be able to click on an item and then filter down automatically what it is from the service requests that are pertaining to that item. They can also look at what might be relevant by type. So maybe it's a general issue that we have with this particular type of item, and so they can drill down and filter into that. So actual use cases within our environment from a day-to-day management point of view. Also being able to go to the other way, being in a work order and then being able to figure out where the hell that actually is inside the building is another thing that's very useful from that point of view. So we wanted to be able to have this environment work for people who don't have engineering skills. The guys who are at the other end of the FM process that are in the call centres, that are the FMs with the hammers, they're not used to working with this kind of technology. So we needed to make sure it could integrate and be simple. And I'd have to say that that process has worked quite well, and we're quite happy with the outcome of that from a real world scenario point of view. We also managed to get some integration of some BMS kind of information so that you can get some data from a few sensors and figure out what's going on. I wouldn't say that that's well progressed. We kind of just wanted to prove to ourselves that we could do it. We plugged into their surveillance system so that you can click on the camera and see what's going on at a particular location in Fed Square. Some of those things are more conceptual than they are real at this stage. We also wanted to have a look at the augmented reality, so the Bentley Navigator and the iModel delivered through an iPad to see if that could be used and would be a useful tool to have. So you can see here the model. It's got a number of predefined touch points. You can do the model in kind of X-ray view so that you can see the structure underneath it. I can hit on one of the buttons and I'm into the office on level 2. Again, I can turn it into X-ray mode and see what that looks like. I'm doing that on my iPad. It's got the stuff in so that if you rotate around, then the model rotates around while you're in the building. It's kind of cool and sexy. But from a tradesperson's point of view, especially in somewhere as complex, we can take days worth of work and cut that down to minutes worth of work. If they're trying to find something that's a water leak, which is a major issue that they have, that can be extremely challenging for them in that kind of environment. There's a whole duct system that runs underneath the courtyards because they leak when they weren't supposed to. When suddenly it didn't go forward. Can I ask my gentleman at the back to advance the slide? What's it doing? There we go, thanks very much. And we also learned a lot about the processes and the technology. And really it's a reiteration of the things that you've heard before today. A couple of things that I would say though is that, we're at the beginning of this process. Change is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for us as human beings. It's uncomfortable for us as organisations. And we really are up in the innovators and early adopters space. This is by no means sorted out and a done deal where it's only the laggards at the end who won't buy into it. And it does introduce us into the space of chaos, and that's okay. It's all right for it to be up and down. It's all right for us to, as Rob was saying, try 3 avenues and find out that none of them are quite right. That's all part of the experiences that we have when we're here. It's okay for clients to order a model and then not get delivered what they expected. That's all part of the process. It's all part of the maturing of what we're trying to achieve. So as an industry, I would say we don't know sometimes what we don't know. In everybody that I've spoken to, it hasn't been anybody maliciously trying to rip the other guy off further down the train. It's simply they didn't know that what the expectations were. They didn't know how they could help. They've all been as keen as mustard once we clarify what it is, to start to break down those silos that we've evolved into over the years. But to do that, we have to understand the business driver. So it's important to understand what it is that we want as the output at the other end. What's driving the owners and the operators when we deliver this thing? We've got to address the human challenges. So we actually have a whole bunch of stuff to sort out in terms of skilling of people, collaboration, communication. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to do. And then we need to leverage technology as the enabler. The road to utopia is a very long journey. Yeah? So I'd prefer to start now and get a practical step on the road to that rather than waiting for it to be perfect before we embark. I think an ex-British Prime Minister said, think big, start small, move fast. It's not a bad kind of philosophy. And I would echo the thought to say, remember that the building information model is an enabler. It's not the end game. It's part of the process, an extremely valuable part of it, but it fits into a much broader scheme. So, for those people who are in the planning phase, you'll get what you ask for, not what you need. Be clear about what it is that you want. Specify an FM-ready built model in detail to what that means. Ensure you own the data. It's enormously valuable. And insist on collaboration throughout the process. And from your point of view, be specific. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what's going on from a design point of view. So people need to let everybody know what the priorities actually are. Don't over-design everything. Specify it so that we understand the level of detail discussion that we had before. I can't underline any more importantly how important that is. And manage the process as you go through that process. I won't talk about these because I've spoken too long already. So I'd just say in kind of a summary, there are challenges in delivering the model. We can do a better job of doing that through the process. It's basically just knowing what it is that we don't know, so seeking knowledge. There are massive benefits. There are very big numbers involved in getting these things right, but you don't have to get everything right at once. It's okay to break it into small chunks and improve that over a period of time. Those of you who are fools, please join me at the pointy end. Those of you who are a bit wiser, learn from the mistakes that those before you have made. Thank you.